Hey guys, and welcome back to our channel. Today we're talking all about cut flower varieties, and we're sharing specifically what we're growing in our 2022 annual garden. So here at Two Sisters Flower Farm, we are entering our 4th growing season growing cut flowers. And while I still feel a long ways from having it all figured out, there's definitely some things that I'm gaining confidence with, and that includes knowing what to plant in our annual cutting garden. Over the years, we have grown a lot of different varieties of flowers. I used to think that I had to grow them all in order to be a successful flower farm. And I also used to think that the key to keeping things interesting year after year, both for myself and for my customers, was growing new and different types of flowers all the time. But what I found is that I tend to fall back on much of the same tried and true varieties each and every season. And so in this video, I want to share with you exactly what we are growing in our flower fields this year, as well as share with you why we love these specific varieties so much. As you'll see, some things we grow because they're loved by customers and they're easy to sell. And others are easy to grow and they make great garden staples. So if you're ready to get started, let's do it. Let me just start by saying that if you'd like more help planning your flower garden this year, then be sure to check out these couple of resources after you watch this video. So in this video here, I talk in more detail about our planning process with growing cut flowers and how we design our cutting garden. I'll link this below in the description box so you can check it out if you're interested. Also, I do want to mention that in our online shop, we currently have our garden planning workbook on sale. So this ebook will guide you through the process as you design and plan your cutting garden this year. Inside the workbook, I walk you through all the steps you need to know in order to enjoy a season's worth of fresh flowers right in your own backyard. It's on sale this month for just $10, so I'll link that in the description box below as well. Okay, let's get back on topic. Let's first talk about what makes a good cut flower. If you've ever browsed the seed catalog or you search the internet for flower seeds, you likely already know that you have a lot of options to choose from. While there's really no wrong choice in deciding what to grow, for me, the things that I look for, the things that matter most when it comes to selecting cut flowers, it really comes down to stem length, vase life, and how productive and or easy that flower is to grow. Let me break a few of those deciding factors down just a little bit. So like I've mentioned in previous videos, stem length is important for cut flowers. You know, having a nice long stem, it gives you flexibility, especially when you're designing arrangements and building bouquets. Next is vase life. Well, there's a lot that can affect the vase life of a flower, things like how the flower is harvested and cared for post-harvest. Some flower varieties have naturally longer vase lives than others. Now, for instance, lizianthus, they can last anywhere from 10 to 14 days in the vase, whereas poppies may only last 3 to 4 days. Now, I appreciate flowers that can age well in the vase because it means that my customers can enjoy their flowers longer. Much of my business is focused on selling market bouquets to people who want to be able to enjoy their flowers for a bit of time. So longevity is important to me. Now, maybe you've decided to tackle event florals where it's more important that flowers look good, for that one event, like a wedding. Then vase life may not be as important to you, or at least it won't be the deciding factor when you're choosing what to grow. This is one example of why it's important to know the goals behind your flower garden. Now, I shared more about the importance of goal setting for your flower garden in this video, so if you haven't checked that one out yet, I'll link it below. Now, last but not least, I also take into consideration the ease of growing and the productivity of the plant, and here's what I mean by that. Some flowers, they simply require more work to care for than others. Some flowers, are more fragile and need extra support, which means you may have to spend extra time staking and netting those varieties. There are other varieties that are more prone to disease, and these may need just a little bit more tending to so that you can ensure that they make it to harvest. And some flowers, they simply send up more stems than others. I mean, obviously getting more stems per plant can be a great thing because you're essentially, getting more flowers without having to do more work. Now, most of the varieties that I'm about to share in my list are actually varieties that really churn out bucket loads of flowers. And I'll share which ones those are specifically. Now I like to call these my garden workhorses because they really give you a lot of bang for your buck. So our strategy this year, when we're deciding which flowers that are going to make the cut into our garden, it's really centered on balancing the desire for variety and wanting to keep things interesting with the need for simplicity. You see, what happens when you grow a lot of different things is that it can become overwhelming because every flower is unique. They're unique in the way that they grow, the growing conditions that they require. They're unique with the number of days it takes for them to mature and be ready for harvest. And each flower has its own proper stage at which it should be harvested. You know, trying to keep track of all those things, it can be a lot, and especially when you're just starting out growing flowers. I tend to think that things work out best when you don't overcomplicate them. So this year, we're really narrowing down our absolute favorite cut flowers and growing what works best for us. So here's what we're growing. Number 1 is zinnias. This year we're doubling the number of zinnia plants that we're growing in our flower fields. Personally, I think zinnias, they deserve a spot in every cut flower garden. And the reason for this is because they are so fast growing. They're easy to grow plants that can produce a lot of flowers. You know, zinnias are often referred to as cut and come again flowers because the more that you harvest from these guys, the more that they produce. Zinnias, they also come in a lot of different colors and even sizes. For instance, the Binary Giants, they're a series of zinnias that have large, showy blooms that work great as focal flowers. In comparison, the Oklahoma series, they're a bit smaller, but they're great supporting flowers to add to arrangements and bouquets. So as you can see, you can get a lot of variety even within that larger category of just zinnia themselves. Now I love the Binary Giant and Salmon Rose. It's this versatile and warm peachy color that pairs well with a lot of different color palettes, and it was a favorite of a lot of my customers this past year. I also love the bold and deep color that's found in the Binary Giant Wine. It has such a striking color that I'm for sure growing it again this year. Now number 2 on our list is marigolds. Similar to zinnias, marigolds have a lot of the same characteristics that make them a great cut flower. They're easy to grow, they're low maintenance plants that also fall into that cut and come again category. I absolutely love how sturdy these plants are. They are resilient and they don't often mind if I show them any neglect, which is perfect if I find myself busy and overwhelmed during our season. Okay, I know a lot of gardeners, they swear by cosmos, and I agree, they are a pretty flower, but if I'm being honest, I struggled in the beginning to really like these guys. I felt like they were a much more fragile flower than some of the others that I was growing in my garden. If I harvested them at the wrong time, it seemed like their petals fell off easily. If I didn't keep up on harvesting, these plants grew massive, to the point that they were difficult to manage. Now what changed my mind for me though was the variety of cosmos I decided to grow. I started growing the doubled varieties, and that's when I finally decided to make these a regular in my annual field. These ruffled blooms, they're just darling. I mean, they work well in both formal arrangements like bridal bouquets, and they also fit in well inside our regular everyday market bouquets. The great thing about cosmos is that they have a more wiry stem, which helps them to add movement to your arrangements, which ultimately gives them that sort of whimsical, airy look that is highly sought after right now. Now, if there's one flower that I plant for its texture, it's celosia. I plant both the plume and the coxcomb types, and I just love how it adds a more natural, almost feather-like element to my arrangements. It gives off sort of that wildflower type feel that I just can't get anywhere else. I especially love the range of colors celosia comes in. Floret Farm in particular, they have bred some show-stopping celosia varieties. I love the bright and bold variety that can be found in Floret's Coral Reef mix, and their Vintage Rose mix is the perfect combination of soft, muted tones. I can't plant enough of this stuff to meet demand for both my retail and my wholesale customers. What's great about this flower too is that if you do happen to plant too much, it works great in dried arrangements. I mean, it can never hurt to have a dual purpose flower growing in your garden. Now, snapdragons, they're sort of that middle ground for me between celosia and cosmos. And what I mean by this is that snapdragons are a great filler for my bouquets because their spike shape provides great contrast from all of the round flowers that I grow. Having snapdragons on hand, it helps me to create interest when I'm trying to build bouquets. And the tips of these flowers, they have this natural arch to them that provides a bit of movement. It's somewhat similar to that airiness that I talked about with cosmos earlier. Now what's more, snapdragons, they're productive plants that thrive in the heat. With a couple of successions of these, I can have blooms all season long. Perhaps the one and only downside to snapdragons is their relatively small seed size. Trust me, you're going to want to start these snapdragon seeds indoors rather than trying to direct sow these guys in the garden. Next on my list is black-eyed Susans. I used to think that black-eyed Susans were boring, a little old-fashioned. I feel like I see them everywhere in people's landscapes, so I really didn't have much interest in growing these guys. That changed one year when I decided to fall plant a row of these guys in my garden. Here in Zone 5B, we can have some pretty cold winters, so there's not a whole lot we can plant in the fall that will survive our winters and bloom in the spring. But I wanted to experiment, so I finally decided to plant these flowers. The next spring, these guys thrived in my garden. They flowered abundantly and were very low maintenance. Now maybe you're like me and you weren't aware, but there are quite a few different varieties of black-eyed Susans available to choose from. I love growing the standard Indian summer black-eyed Susans that you're probably most familiar with. They have some very large blooms that honestly a lot of people mistake for sunflowers, especially early on in my season. I've also grown in the past Gloriosa double daisy. It's such a fun like fringe variety. Honestly, they were so different from the more traditional black-eyed Susan varieties that most people, they didn't even realize what they were. I'm also growing this year a Cherokee Sunset mix, which is black-eyed Susans in a lot of different bronze and orange shades. I'm really banking it for me and this variety being popular towards the end of my season once we hit fall. Let's take a second to talk about sunflowers. Sunflowers are such an iconic summer flower that you're probably not surprised that they made it onto my list. Sunflowers are easy to grow, but unlike most everything else on this list that grows abundantly, sunflowers are the exception to the rule. Now I plant the pollinous single stem sunflower varieties, and from each plant I'm able to harvest one and only one flower. And despite this, I gladly plant oodles of sunflowers in my garden each year because nothing compares to the profitability of sunflowers. Even if you factor in the fact that I can only get one bloom per plant, and I receive a lower retail price per stem, these guys are more profitable for me for a number of reasons. Now for starters, the space. I plant my sunflowers just 6 inches apart and I can cram a lot of plants in only a small piece of land. Sunflowers, they also have fewer inputs involved. I direct seed my sunflowers, so I never have the added expense of dirt or lights that are often required when starting seeds in trays. Also, and this is important, I have a market for them. I learned early on that in my area there is a demand for sunflowers both with retail and wholesale customers. And lastly, sunflowers are fast growing. They can outpace the weeds naturally, so I don't have to use weed barrier on them. And the fact that it takes them less time to mature, I mean sunflowers that usually take just 55 to 60 days after planting to mature, it helps reduce any disease pressure. There's a lot to love when it comes to sunflowers, and whether you want to plant them to enjoy yourself or you plan on sharing them with others, I can't encourage you enough to give these guys a try. Now, no garden talk would be complete without the mention of dahlias. These flowers have really gained in popularity in the last few years, and for good reason. They are true showstoppers. They come in so many different colors, shapes, and sizes. They all have this like silkiness to their petals that you don't get with a lot of other flower varieties. What I appreciate most about dahlias is their timing. These guys really start cranking toward the end of the season once a lot of things in my garden have really lost steam. In August and September, when dahlias start turning out buckets of flowers, almost everything else like my zinnias and cosmos, they're starting to look tired. And so having dahlias to harvest from is always a welcome relief for me to ensure that I can provide flowers to my customers all the way to that first frost. Now, some disadvantages of dahlias is their initial cost. A tuber can cost you anywhere from $6 to sometimes $25 a piece. And the added labor of having to dig and store your dahlia tubers in the winter, it can be a lot for some people. You'll have to decide for yourself if the extra work is worth it for you to include these in your own garden. But personally, I couldn't imagine growing a garden without at least a few of these treasures tucked somewhere inside. Now last but certainly not least on my list of what we're growing this season are lizianthus. Lizianthus are one of those flowers that I tell myself every year I'm not going to grow it. But then it blooms in the summer and I'm really glad that I did. Here's why I love this flower so much. They have this beautiful rose-like form, and despite their delicate appearance, they are such a long-lasting flower. You can typically get a vase life of 10 to 14 days with lizianthus. But the downside is that they take almost 5 months to grow before you can harvest from them, which means it takes a lot of work to get them to bloom. And it requires that you have the forethought early enough in the season to plant these guys so that they actually flower for you. I might be crazy, but this is another one of those varieties that we're doubling our production of this year. I mean, only time will tell if it's the right decision this season, but I'm excited to see how it turns out. And there you have it. That completes our list for what we're planting in our 2022 annual garden. If you'd like more details on how we plant each individual variety, then I encourage you to follow us over on Instagram. I post reels every week sharing helpful growing tips, and I try my best to give you a behind the scenes look into how we grow everything that we do here on our farm. If you found this video helpful, we'd really appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Thanks so much for tuning in, everyone, and until next time, I will see you in the next video.